welcome back to another episode of Nutrition Radio. Thank you so much for being here today. Once again, I love to say thanks. I'm super grateful for every single one of you guys, whether it's on YouTube watching me speak directly to your camera, or if you're on your car listening to this as a radio show. I am very thankful for you for showing up every week and learning a little bit more of unbiased and evidence-based and science-based nutrition. Today's episode is not going to disappoint. Back a few episodes back, I actually talked about the fact that I went to a dairy farm and I had an amazing experience that completely changed the way that I see dairy and the dairy industry. A lot of misconceptions out there. And I actually ran very recently into a tag or somebody on Instagram, and her tag on Instagram is the dairy dietitian. So of course, I was very curious to see what kind of content she was putting out. Anyways, long story short, I saw her speak on live videos and all these different things, and I was super excited to be able to see her. So I figured I would bring her into the podcast. She agreed to it, and today I am having her on, discuss and share a lot of her knowledge and a lot of her experience into the podcast. So her name is Lauren Twigge. She's a Dallas-based registered dietitian with a master's degree in clinical nutrition and a bachelor's degree in animal science. You're going to hear in the podcast that she wanted to be a veterinarian because she actually grew up in a farm. She works now in corporate wellness and counsels a few private clients, so she definitely has her own private practice by day. And she is running currently a growing Instagram account by night called The Dairy Dietitian, or in The Dairy Nutritionist. I totally forgot. I'm blanking on this. Lauren was born and raised in a family of farmers in California and is an outspoken supporter of the agricultural industry. Growing up in a dairy farm and being raised around farmers her whole life, Lauren has a unique perspective on food, and her passion is to work at the crux of agriculture and human nutrition with the goal of fighting misinformation and give consumers back their food confidence. Lauren is known as the Dairy Dietitian, so I got that correctly, on Instagram, and educates on a variety of health topics, including but not limited the truth about the dairy industry and the role the dairy products can play in a healthy diet. So of course, that's all we talked about today. She kind of shared her experience, what kind of goes on a dairy farm, some sustainability practices, some common misconceptions, and some of the things that she's currently and always fighting about with many people that don't understand the truth behind the dairy industry. So in today's episode, you're not going to be disappointed with the wealth of information and a lot of the knowledge bombs that were dropped during this conversation. So without further ado, here's Lauren Twigge on episode, I believe this is episode number 95 or 96 on Vive Nutrition Radio. Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to Vive Nutrition Radio. As you probably heard it on the introduction, I was pretty excited to bring my guest here today into a podcast because we're going to be talking about a super exciting yet controversial topic, which is dairy. And as you probably heard it, she comes from a family of farmers, and she's also an amazing dietitian. Lauren Twigge, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely.
How are you?
I'm doing good. Good.
Good.
I'm glad that we kind of go over the technical difficulties so we can actually kind of create some really cool content here today. So
yeah, absolutely.
I'm excited. So I figured that we could probably start this conversation from the beginning, right? So as I was reading your bio, it was really interesting because I've seen your Instagram and talking and educating about dairy and some the misconceptions. So we'll get to that eventually. But I still kind of wanted to, it was really interesting to me the fact that you actually grew up in a farm or come from a family of farmers. So why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about your background and a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Lauren. I actually was born and raised in Central California. So my family is involved in kind of all different kinds of agriculture. So dairy farming is just one part of that. Also do kind of some tree fruit and nut farming as well. And now I live in Dallas, Texas. So I'm not on the farm anymore, but I grew up and it was very much a part of my roots. And because of that, I went to Texas A&M, and I had kind of the ultimate goal of becoming a veterinarian. I loved animals, animal care was a big part of my childhood. And so that was my number one goal. Well, then I got there and I kind of got out of my little bubble. I mean, I grew up in a small town. A lot of people are involved in agriculture there. And so it was just a lot of people kind of like me and my family and with similar views. And honestly, the biggest thing was similar exposure to agriculture. And then I left and I went to a large school and I realized people aren't in touch with agriculture the way that I was raised. And that's okay. But I feel like that started to lead to a lot of misperceptions. And so I constantly found myself kind of in this role of, explaining dairy farming, explaining modern day agriculture, kind of explaining all of these things. And then I kind of started to get into the health benefits of it all. So I started to think about, well, how can I really shape these topics into a topic that people care about? And a lot of people care about their nutrition. And, if we are, as farmers, growing food, I wanted to learn about how does that food help people, and then be able to educate them on kind of where their food comes from and what it does for them and their bodies. So now I'm a dietitian. I have a master's in clinical nutrition, and I work in corporate wellness by day, and then kind of do this Instagram adventure by night. And I'll use adventure because really, I mean, it is an adventure talking about dairy. Yeah, it's been fun.
And I'm sure it's obviously kind of has its really kind of benefits as far as like understanding like how people are sometimes very misinformed on many of these different kinds of areas. So in your bachelor's degree, it's in animal science. So
yes.
So you didn't decide to get into like the dietetics route after you graduated, or like, so you were like already en route to become a veterinarian from what it sounds like.
Yep. So I changed courses second semester of my junior year. But by that point, they were like, okay, well, you're either going to be here for another 4 years or graduate with your degree and then, find a coordinated program. So I graduated with an animal science degree from Texas A&M University and then went to a coordinated program here in Dallas. So it actually worked out perfect for me. I mean, to me, I had a lot of controversy even trying to switch majors. People, or a lot of the nutrition professors, said to me, well, you can't be a dietitian. But I understood and was educated on a lot of like the animal production side of things, which to me goes really seamlessly into nutrition. And I took a lot of the science courses that you would see for a typical dietitian. So it did overlap better than I expected, but I had to go through a coordinated program. So did you do like standard dietetic internship? Or
I did. So I was in Houston, so I was not too far from
you.
You.
Were?
So I did
cool.
my dietetic internship at the University of Houston, Texas Medical Center.
Nice.
And yeah, so I'm very familiar with like, Texas, and it was one of my favorite states. Like if I would move back anywhere, it would definitely be Houston or Austin. Never been to Dallas though. So that's maybe
okay. You gotta come check it out.
Yeah, I heard great things about it. So that's awesome. So did you actually grew up in a farm? Like, you literally like you had, cows or agriculture going on in your backyard pretty much?
Yeah. So I was born and raised kind of on the farm, and I have 6 brothers and sisters. So we eventually outgrew our house and had to move a little bit off the dairy and then kind of into a bigger home because there's just not enough space for everybody in the house that I was born in. So I grew up on the dairy. We're right up the road really from the dairy. And then my summer jobs looked a lot different than other people's summer jobs. I mean, I worked on the farm with my brothers and it was so fun. I loved, there's something different when you learn how to like kind of work with your hands and everything, and you're facing the elements. It gives you a whole new respect for people who do that every day for their job. And that's how they put food on the table. So, yeah.
Well, it's actually interesting because I think it was close right before COVID started. We had the opportunity to visit some of the dairy farmers here in Florida. And it was mind blown to me because I had no idea really like how misinformed even dietitians are. As far as like the reality, like, like the amazing care that they take of like, the cows and all the process and how it goes and, and all the things that you kind of hear. And we'll talk about some things as far as like Netflix documentaries and all these different things that is completely misconstrued. And obviously seeing this firsthand, and in just only one day that I get to experience that, it was completely mind blown to me. And that's why I was like, hearing that you actually come from this background and you know exactly everything that goes on and some of like the crazy things that people talk about that is completely untrue, it's definitely something that kind of gave me a different perspective.
Yeah,
So
I think that's awesome. I mean, I wish every dietitian, I mean, I really wish everybody in general, but I wish that people could go out and kind of just see firsthand, because a lot of times now that's not what people's jobs look like anymore. You know, they're
mhm.
not on the farm, and that's okay. But I think that that's, and I know we'll talk about it, but that's led to a lot of the disconnect. And I so wish, especially for food professionals, they should get a little bit of an insight into where does the food actually come from, because I would like to say that I think it would paint a different picture for a lot of people, you know, kind of like what you were just saying. So I think that's awesome that you got to go out and
Yeah,
see. I mean, I was fortunate enough to just, I was
be
just
there and grew
be
up in
there.
there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's amazing. So of course, like, one of the questions I did have was actually how you became interested in teaching about dairy, but obviously I think you kind of like answered that itself.
Yeah.
Now I think obviously we like to always start like, setting the groundwork and in this
Hmm.
conversation. And I feel like even for people listening to this, like I feel like it's important to kind of establish some definitions. So like, can you maybe tell the audience and people listening in, like, what is considered dairy?
Hmm.
And sort of maybe, and we can kind of like chime in together, but obviously you're the expert on this, like, the nutritional benefits that actually dairy provides. This obviously comes with milk and any of the byproducts that we're talking about.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, you touched on it a little bit. Basically, when we think of dairy, you think of milk, cheese, and yogurt, basically milk and milk products. I think a lot of times people can get kind of stuck in that. There's lots of other dairy products out there. I mean, think of kefir, think of cottage cheese, think of, smoothies that are dairy based. Like there's lots of ways to incorporate dairy in your diet, but essentially it's milk and milk products. Butter also included as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the dietary guidelines include, or they recommend 3 servings for an adult, 3 servings per day of low fat or non-fat dairy. Um, you know, there's lots of health benefits to including dairy in your diet. The dietary guidelines also do include calcium fortified soy milk in the dairy category of the plate. I think a lot of people forget about that, but that's something that I touch on a lot, is if you do want to be dairy free, or if you do want to choose an alternative, not all alternatives are created equal. And the only one that's actually recommended as a good nutritional alternative is calcium fortified soy milk. So I like to include that little bit as well. But dairy as a whole, you would be hard pressed to find anything that's more nutrient dense than dairy. And just to elaborate, when we say nutrient density, right, we're talking about high in nutrients, relatively low in calories, or lots of nutrients per calorie. There's very few food groups or very few food items that would compare to milk as far as nutrient density goes. And the reason why I like that a lot is because you get a lot of bang for your buck. I mean, not only is it nutrient dense, but it's also relatively affordable. So you've got a really affordable source of really high nutrition. And that, to me, in and of itself, is one of the biggest selling points of dairy products. I think it's realistic for people of all income levels, and that's one of the reasons why I like to advocate for it so much, is I just think it's really applicable for a lot of people and really accessible. Obviously it does have to be refrigerated, but even if refrigeration aside, another dairy product would be like milk powder, something that's shelf stable. You can rehydrate it into a dairy-based beverage and still get the same nutrition. So, we're talking 8 grams of high quality protein, complete protein. It is obviously an animal source protein. It has other 9 essential nutrients. So vitamin D, calcium is obviously a big one there. Vitamin A is also in milk, added to milk. And then you've got some things in like smaller levels, such as potassium and phosphorus,
Yep.
niacin, lots of these other smaller nutrients.
Good.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's good
yeah.
because like I agree 100% like with you, and I think like many people, I don't know, I feel like I've seen a shift, and obviously people kind of like steering a little bit more away and further away from dairy. And I guess it's also an important to kind of like, because I think this conversation, we can kind of break it down into like the nutritional piece, the
Mm-hmm.
environmental piece, and then it's also like the ethical piece, which I feel like again, like that's where, like in the last two pieces, I feel like there's a lot of, again, misconceptions.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes down to like still kind of like maintaining or staying on like the nutritional kind of like side of it, is like, I guess like a lot of people would argue or so that sometimes like humans, they're not necessarily need milk, or basically
Mm-hmm.
they would say, well, we're our digestive, this is what I hear all the time, like our digestive systems were not actually made to actually process like, dairy milk from cows and so
Mm-hmm.
forth. So whether it's like through milk intolerances, milk kind of like, allergies. Can you elaborate more, a little bit more on this? Because I know you made a few posts about intolerances like versus like allergies, like versus things like this.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's definitely a really huge piece of it. I think there is a portion of that that does come from that ethical bracket, right? People they don't think that we were made to process this milk, but our bodies are made to process protein, carbs, and fat. Milk is protein, carbs, and fat. That's kind of my take on it. I mean, I get the ethical side of it. But then another part of that is, yeah, like these food intolerances, these food allergies. So milk allergy, right, is an allergic response, an immune response to the casein, which is a protein found in milk. So there's whey and there's casein, protein in milk. Your body takes in this casein and it sees it kind of as an intruder. I mean, we know all of this, right? And then it stimulates this big immune response. You have some people's responses are fairly minor. Some people's are life-threatening. So if you have like a true milk allergy, you should be dairy free. Absolutely, you should. There's a lot of research coming out on kind of A2 milk. I wouldn't say it's super conclusive yet. It's still fairly new.
What's
But
A2
that is
milk?
A2 milk. So there's basically two different strains of casein,
Mm-hmm.
and cows in the United States produce both strains. And A2 milk is from cows that only have one strain of casein in it. And that's supposed to stimulate a lower immune response, or at least be an option for people who have a milk allergy, is that you're having this immune response to the casein that's now no longer present. So if you have it to the one of the strands and they remove that from the milk itself, then you should be able to tolerate the milk.
And
So like I said,
this is just a type of cow that the
yeah,
genetics of it produces this type of milk.
yep. So they've been selected to produce this specific type of milk. And you'll find it in stores, it's labeled A2. I get a lot of questions on it, and I haven't dove into that super, super deep yet. I'd like to probably in the future just learn more about it and see if that would be an option, because I think that it could be a really good option for those with a milk allergy. But then, sorry, on the flip side, I'm long-winded, clearly.
You're good.
On the flip side, we've got these milk intolerance, right? Lactose intolerance. Everybody throws out this really scary number. 70% of people are lactose intolerant. First off, many of those are not officially diagnosed. So if that number features self-diagnosis, it could definitely be inflamed a little bit, that number. And another thing that I think is important to point out is that lactose intolerance, unlike a milk allergy, a milk intolerance typically doesn't require you to go completely dairy free. There's lots of diet adjustments that you can make, still include dairy in your diet, but then kind of get rid of some of those nasty GI symptoms that we typically see with like a lactose intolerance. So milk allergy, immune response, lactose intolerance, more of a digestive issue, but we can work with that with dairy.
And then so both, because this is interesting, because like I never actually looked at it from like the perspective of the allergy being caused by a protein within milk, and then like the other one caused by a carbohydrate from milk, which is lactose. So you're saying obviously that the casein produces of sort of like an immune response to the body, like possibly inflammation and those different things like this, while the other is sort of causing some of those like gas and like maybe bloating and like, or sometimes like diarrhea and those kind of symptoms like that. So that's kind of like how you would say you differentiate them?
Yeah, absolutely. You can have, some people bring up the topic of a casein intolerance. I don't know as much about a casein intolerance as I do lactose intolerance. I would say lactose, the carbohydrate in milk, that would be a more common issue among people. But when you think about it, so lactose is the primary milk sugar. When we drink milk, eat yogurt, our body needs to break that lactose down into smaller pieces so that it can be absorbed better. The way that you break it down is with an enzyme, lactase. And some people don't produce high enough amounts of the lactase enzyme to break that sugar down. So then your body's got all this lactose in its stomach and it can't break it down. So it just wants to spit it out. And then that's what causes kind of that bloating, you know, it's floating around in there, and then the diarrhea and all those other symptoms that you'll see. So yeah, I typically describe it like that, just plain and simple. One of them is an immune response to casein, kind of similar, you know, if you think about it, similar to like celiac condition responding to gluten. People can outgrow a milk allergy though. That's one thing to add.
Okay.
Some people don't, some people do. A lot of kids can. So there is a little bit of a difference, and then they require completely different diet interventions.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I think a lot of times like people talk about like dairy and like causing inflammation. And I think in some cases it's in some way related to the fact that they could be, if anything, like, or they kind of related to the people that do have a milk allergy.
Yes.
Or options like this. Is that what you kind of like see being the case in here?
Yeah, and I've done quite a few posts kind of on this topic. Dairy has long been deemed inflammatory, you know, you should eliminate it. But a lot of the research points the opposite direction. It can play a huge role in an anti-inflammatory diet. There's been a lot of emerging evidence on that. There was a recent one done. I refer to this one a lot because it's one of the better studies that I've found. It was just from 2017, and they reviewed over 52 clinical trials and found that dairy, milk and milk products, so it used to be just yogurt was found to be anti-inflammatory. And now they're starting to include, you know, plain milk, yogurt as well. And then they're looking into cheese, which I think cheese is maybe not quite as in the loop as the others. But it's anti-inflammatory for those who do not have a milk allergy. If you have a milk allergy, part of an immune response is inflammation. So, you know, then milk would be inflammatory to you. But for others, it's pretty promising. The research shows that it may actually be anti-inflammatory.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think I think it's important for like kind of like to create that distinction, and yeah, that's interesting. And I think also, so we kind of covered the nutritional piece, and I think it's pretty safe to say that we know that milk and dairy is a pretty like nutrient dense, you know, kind of component, and it can be incorporated into people's diets effectively, unless obviously there's a milk allergy that you can outgrow in some cases, or a milk or intolerance in which there are dairy products that are either lactose free or can be actually kind of still incorporated. Now, I still not like to kind of like bring things back to the source, because I feel like a lot of the misconceptions that exist around dairy, specifically in, you know, vegan communities and stuff like that, is related to the source, not just like the nutritional, but it's simply like from the moment how cows are treated, how milk is extracted, and all these different things. I don't think I could ask a better person than actually dairy farmer herself, or somebody that grew up in a farm. So what's the reality behind this? Because recently, I got a bunch of clients because I've recommended Fairlife to a lot of people. And ever since that documentary actually came out, like people started to like, you know, even some people told me like, I can't believe you're recommending this to me. And I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, watch his documentary. And it was obviously something a little bit too crazy for a lot of people. And I'm like, okay, so we need to obviously kind of get to the source. And obviously this was like even before I even went to a dairy farmers, and I told them about this, and they're like, yeah, like that's just like so misconstrued and so crazy. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about the sourcing of milk, and some of like, maybe even talk about like some of the typical misconceptions. Like, yeah, people think this is what happens versus in reality, this is what actually happens.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. There's so many topics. I don't even really know where to begin. So I think the biggest thing is a lot of the videos that circulate around, you know, that people use kind of as their ammo in arguments. These are one-off videos. I wouldn't say that this is something that's representative of the dairy industry as a whole. And yet you see them over and over and over and over again. These same videos being brought up to the surface, and they're not representative of the dairy industry as a whole. The thing that I cannot understand is, you know, dairy cows, and people don't like this. This obviously, some people don't like the way that this is phrased, but dairy cows are the dairy farmer's investment. They are everything to the dairy farmer. They are. It's just like, you know, if you had a car salesman, they're not going to go out there and treat the car on the lot horribly and expect it to perform or expect people to want it or whatever. You know, you take care of it. And I'm comparing it to a car. I know they are not the same.
But I get the point. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, cows are so well fed. They are so well cared for. They have these beautiful sandy beds. A lot of them have misters. Some dairies have massage machines there for the cows. Like, there's so many efforts that the dairy farmers make to make their cows comfortable. And yes, it's because comfortable cows, they're happier. They tend to be, you know, they're healthier. They produce more milk. There's lots of pros to keeping your cows healthy. And so that's a big part of the dairy industry. Their dairy cows are their investment. And dairy cows are also not, they're not cheap. You don't just pick one up off the side of the road. So when a dairy farmer decides to have these cows in the herd, those cows are extremely valuable to the dairy farmer, and they are very well cared for. So, you know, I always like to say, I am not going to pretend like every dairy farmer does everything 100% right. However, I do think that they put a lot of emphasis on certain farmers who don't follow the standards, who don't perform up to quality control, who don't perform the same animal care practices and practice good animal husbandry that other farmers would. And unfortunately, those farmers have become the face of the industry when there's so many people out there that don't fit that category. I mean, I can speak personally to it. Our cows were so well cared for, and we live in the middle of California. It's so hot there. You know, they always had fresh drinking water. They always had fresh food. Those cows eat over like 100 pounds of food in a day. And they always had food available to them. You know, it's like feeding a garbage disposal. And it's just incredible to see the disconnect between what I saw growing up and what I've heard as I've gotten older.
Well, that's exactly what I saw when I went to this like dairy farmers, and like, you know, he gave us an entire tour, and that's exactly what he said. Is like, we care about these cows more sometimes than we care about ourselves.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like there's like they gave us a story when like hurricane came, and like they're just like all kind of like putting their lives at risk just to make sure that the cows were taken care of. They were actually put in the right places, and yeah, you're right. It's like it's a big investment that is for them, but at the same time, again, like I changed a lot of my perspectives of what I thought about what dairy was. Like, for example, here's an interesting one. Like, cows are connected to this like milk suckling like machine like 24/7. And then one of the things, and correct me if I'm wrong, at least maybe different practices in different places, but he's like, actually they come in here 3 to 5 minutes a day, and then like I don't remember, it was like once or twice a day, and then they're milked, and then they go on their day, and then they're just kind of like let alone for the rest of the day.
Generally twice a day. Cows are milked twice a day for, I would say, around under 10 minutes. Like they don't stand in there all day long and, you know.
Yeah. And I think that's I think the idea that most people have. Like, these are machines that are kind of plugged into machines, and like all they do is like kind of stay in this little small little hole, and it wasn't really the reality. And I think that's obviously something that I also learned. And when I looked at the little calves, and they were just all happy and stuff like that, so they're growing up, because that's the other thing too. Like, you know, they grow up, and like they don't milk until like, but I don't know if it's like 18 months or you know, something like this, that they can actually kind of do this. So it definitely changed my perspective on many different things that I feel like people don't necessarily have. They just kind of like look, as you mentioned, like, you know, the face of the dairy, which is like the ones that are mistreated, or the ones that are not treated the right way by standards that they should be treating it.
Yeah, exactly. And those are the ones that you'll see featured in the Netflix documentaries. You know, those are the ones that you'll see circulating on the internet. And I just think it's so unfortunate for the dairy farmers. And there is nobody who is more embarrassed and kind of disgraced by those videos than the dairy farmers themselves, the ones who have been following all of the rules, the ones who take it upon themselves to like really take care of their cows and really value their cows. There's nobody that's more disappointed than them. So I don't know. It's very frustrating. You know, I think cow care is actually one of the largest selling points of the dairy industry, and it's one that unfortunately gets the most misunderstood.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Yeah, that's kind of one thing. I was trying to think, I know that you had mentioned, which I don't know if this falls into this question, but you had mentioned kind of tracking where or how milk goes from the farm to the store. Do you want to talk about that now, or should
Yeah,
I?
I mean, I think
Okay.
that that's would be good because I feel like if people understand what happens from day one up until the moment that they actually pick up a gallon of milk from the store, I think it'll get basically kind of give them a better perspective. I kind of got to see it a little bit,
Mhm.
the whole process of kind of like going milk into tanks and like all the process of kind of how that's handled. But I think
Mhm.
obviously you would be a perfect person to be able to kind of like walk through this process.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, starting at the very beginning, very, very beginning, right? So, you've got these calves. One of the biggest hot topics is calf separation from its mother. Um, the reason why farmers do that is for the calf's benefit. I know that it seems horrific, but it's not. It's actually really not. It's more of a seamless process than what people like to display. The reason why farmers do that is that you are first off protecting the calf. Some cows don't do a fantastic job of taking care of their calf. We've got lots of predators that can steal the calves away. And then also they can get sick when they're all in a pen together. So they separate them. Most dairy farmers put them in a hutch, which is essentially, think of like a big baby crib.
Hmm.
It's designed to keep the calf safe. There, you can monitor how much they're eating, how much they're drinking, how much milk are they getting. A lot of them do still get, it depends on the farm, but a lot of them do still get some of that milk from the cow herd. Some farmers need to use like a powder instead, depending on kind of how the production looks. But then you can monitor them a little bit more individually. And if one gets sick, you're able to kind of isolate it and treat it. So it just keeps your whole herd
Yeah.
healthier. So that's a very hot topic.
The most interesting thing that I saw there is like they all get marked and like they all get
Yes.
like and as one of the things that because we kind of like saw like we went into like the hutch where like some of like the calves and the younger ones were actually there, and like basically they can monitor, like that was like mind blown to me, the fact that they can monitor when a cow is like, for example, when a calf is not eating enough and like it's
Mm-hmm.
not coming to eat, and they're like, oh, like so they have everything super laid out. They know
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, this one there's maybe something wrong, we're gonna call the veterinarian, they're gonna come and check it out, like yeah, this calf may
Yeah.
need something. So that was really interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's, you just said it. I mean, I think that's a huge factor, is a lot of these farms do have vets either on site or on call at all times. So the benefit of having these calves on their own, or even cows who are sick separated, you're able to intervene really early on so that you can help keep them or get them healthy again as soon as possible. So that's kind of step one. Well, then these calves get bigger. They do come out of the hutch. They go into, pens with cows their age and whatnot, and they're generally bred, I would say, they have to go through obviously their first cycle, the heifers do, and then they're bred generally around, I would say, 15 months or so, and they have their first baby closer to 2 years old. So they're not bred so early on, like they are physically able to be bred. And I always like to say, because people get really up in arms about that, but if you were to release these animals out into the wild and just let them be and put a bull out there, the bull would breed them at the same time as people do, or as they have them bred by bulls on site. So I think sometimes people, when animals come into heat, they generally are bred. So that's something
Yeah.
I like to add in. So then they have their calf. Well, then they get milked, right? So now we're at the milking spot of things. So they get milked, and in the farm, they then cool that off on site and they hold it in tanks. And generally every 24 hours, a milk truck comes to the dairy and picks up the milk. The milk is transferred in like a very insulated truck, which I'm sure you saw all of this when
It's like
you
a
saw.
gasoline truck, but it obviously is just the
Yes.
dairy. Hmm.
Yeah, it's just for milk, and it keeps the milk really, really cold so that it always stays within food safety, measures. Then it typically goes to a processing plant. And throughout all of these steps, from the milking to the processing plant, milk is being tested for quality, for antibiotics. It has to meet certain quality regulations in order to even be approved to be taken to the processing plant, or they dump it out. If it's not good enough milk, they dump it, they discard it. It doesn't ever come to our grocery stores.
Yeah.
So then it gets to the processing plant, and that's where it's generally pasteurized and homogenized. And I always tell people, please just buy pasteurized milk. Like, I
Because
don't know what
there's
this
a
whole
big
kick
trend.
is.
There's a big trend with raw milk,
Yes.
right? So what did
Yes.
that come about? And what is raw milk? Raw milk is milk directly from the cows, correct?
Yes. Yep. Yep. Raw milk is directly from the cows. Obviously people way back in the day used to drink it, but then we got smarter and we started to come up with better ways to make our food safer to consume. And so they came up with pasteurization, which is just the heating of milk to kill off potentially harmful bacteria. So obviously, I mean, this is a living, breathing animal. You're going to take the milk out and there's bacteria that can come from the udder of the cow, on the outside. And the milking process is very clean. They clean all the machines. They always clean the udders of the cows, but you always have that risk for getting in some outside bacteria. It's being transferred, lots of moving parts for the milk to become compromised. And so that's why we pasteurize it. So then that removes those harmful bacteria. So right now there's this big trend to drink raw milk and buy raw milk. And you are like, I want to say, I think it's either 150 or 180 times more likely to get sick from raw milk than you are from pasteurized milk. And, there's a lot of benefits. People don't want things that have been touched by human hands or gone through processing.
Is that why people want to do raw milk? Because there's
Yeah.
just like this less like processing steps that the milk has gone through.
Yeah, it's a little bit more natural, which is one of my least favorite nutrition terms ever. There's lots of reasons why people choose it. They're also under the impression that there's healthy bacteria, that when you heat the milk, that you are removing dangerous but also beneficial bacteria. But there's been studies that have shown milk to not contain that gut healthy bacteria that people like to think is there. It's just not worth the risk, in my opinion. There's lots of other ways to get in gut healthy bacteria than to put yourself at risk with raw milk, especially for kids, especially for the elderly. It's just not worth it. So anyways, at the processing plant, pasteurized, homogenized, and then it goes to what other milk product it's going to make. So it can be milk that you drink, it can become yogurt, it can become milk powder, it can become butter. From there, it gets sent off to become whatever it's going to be. And then it gets into your grocery store. And on average, milk goes from the farm to the grocery store in 2 days. So it's a very, very fast turnaround.
Yeah.
A very fresh, and people, obviously there's a big pull for local, and I love supporting local, but a lot of times because milk is so perishable, a lot of times you are generally supporting a farmer in your area when you buy
that's what it was like, actually kind of like also really interesting to me, because when we went to like this dairy farmers in the middle of like Central Florida, I said like, so where can I get your milk? And it's like, well, if you probably go to the Publixes in these cities in Lower Miami and this place, any kind of Borden milk that you get is probably gonna come from our farms. And it's like,
cool.
So Borden doesn't have their own. It's like, no, they work with dairy farmers, and then they basically are the company that does all the processing and everything and puts everything on their stores. So it's not like, because I think a lot of people think it's like, well, from what I understand, I guess like there are some brands that you see out there that they have their own dairy, like they have dairy farms, and some of them they just simply get it from dairy farmers and then just obviously have their own labeling and everything on in there, from what I understood.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So it was really cool to see, like, okay, so a lot of the milk that we get from my store is probably coming from a farm that is like, it's not in California. It's like something that is probably around here.
Yeah, because it'd be bad probably by the time it got all the way from California to Florida. I mean, I guess you could put it on a plane, but yeah, you're supporting local by just shopping generally at your local grocery store, which I think is pretty cool. Yeah.
Now, also one of the things that you also mentioned, and I think you mentioned the word antibiotics, and I think there's another big topic that a lot of people kind of push, against dairy. That is like, my milk is. There's two things that they say. Like, number one is you're drinking pus. Okay, that's number one. Then number two is like you're drinking something rich in antibiotics, or that is being like I think it's like RSBG treated or something like this. So or what BST. Is your typical RSBT BST? So what is the typical kind of response that you have when it comes down to this? When people kind of like use that as an argument to say like, I'm drinking antibiotics and drinking like all this stuff like in there.
I mean, I typically take them one by one, but generally speaking, I mean, milk is the most regulated food item in our food system here in the United States. And I can't say for other countries, but it's extremely regulated. So as far as antibiotics go, milk is tested so many times between the farm and the grocery store, or the processing plant. And antibiotic residues are strictly prohibited. I mean, you cannot have antibiotic residues in your milk. If they test at any point, if they find any residue, that milk is dumped out. There are so many protocols that go into place on a farm, as far as treating the animal and then reintroducing them back to the herd, and then testing the milk to make sure that you don't have any antibiotics, to really kind of guarantee that your milk is antibiotic free. Another thing that I think people like to think that farmers are just throwing around antibiotics willy-nilly, and antibiotics are extremely expensive. So they're very monitored. They're administered by a vet. And then there's regulations that go to make sure that the milk is safe. So if the milk is found to have any antibiotics in it, that milk is dumped out. And I mean, we're talking, then the farmers fined a hefty fine, tens of thousands of dollars generally, to dump out that milk. That's step one. In the pus conversation, you just really lose me with that one, because there is no pus in your milk. I just think it's gross. Oftentimes they're referring to somatic cell count, which is white blood cells. Milk is from a living animal. There's white blood cells naturally going to be in the milk. That's one of the benefits, or one of the good incentives to keep your herd really, really healthy, is the healthier your herd, the less white blood cells you have in your milk, because they're not fighting an infection. So that's another incentive to keep your cows super healthy. And then there are regulations on how many white blood cells you can have in your milk. But I think the important distinction is white blood cells, or somatic cell count, does not equal pus. I mean, they're not the same. They're not synonymous terms.
Somebody probably just decided to put it together and just say,
and you've probably seen those horrible graphics that's got like the milk with really scary handwriting and everything. I mean, it's just fear mongering at its finest.
And when I think one of the things I learned about the whole thing antibiotics is, I think people also don't understand, okay, why do antibiotics are used in cows? And just like the farmer literally told me, is like, do you ever get sick and get an infection? So what do you use to treat yourself? Like an antibiotic in most cases. So the same thing as with cows. And I think what resonated with me the most is the fact that he said, like, if I leave this cow and go out there, there's a bunch of animals, there's birds and all these different things. Like, how do you think all these viruses and all these kind of things actually happen? It's because usually there's a contact with an animal, like avian something, and then a cow, and there's a bacteria, and that kind of develops. So there's actually chances that the cow is probably going to, if it's not treated, probably will die. Right. So like the antibiotics are used to treat these cows, but then it's not like, if there's and correct me if I'm wrong, if there's a sick cow, they isolate it, they treat it. And then like once everything, it run its course and everything is good, then it kind of put it back into the herd, from what I understand. Right.
Yeah. You're spot on. Yeah. Cause I mean, and there's multiple reasons. Obviously you want to separate it to not get the rest of the cow sick. You don't really know what it is. So sometimes, there's common diseases that you see. But like you were saying, I mean, these conditions or these diseases can come from anywhere. And so they isolate the cow. A, you don't want to get the other cows sick. And B, then you can really individualize their care and monitor them as an individual cow, and make the most of their treatment. So yeah, I mean, you're spot on. And then once they're good to go, they get to go back into the normal herd. So yeah, there's just lots of regulations. I mean, when people come at me with those arguments, I would say they've most likely not been to a farm, and they don't know about a lot of the background regulations that go on. I mean, yeah, like I said, milk is the most regulated food item out there. So I feel very confident in its safety, just knowing a little bit about what it goes through.
Yeah, that makes sense. So did you actually grow up drinking the milk that came from, and I'm guessing it was in raw milk, but did you actually grew up drinking the milk that was actually produced by your farm?
No, so I didn't, but a lot of the people from my area do drink milk, and then that milk is raw, like it's not gone to the processing plant. So I typically say, if you were born and raised drinking the raw milk fresh off your farm, you're probably okay. I mean, you've made it this far. It's this whole trend to go out and instead of buying pasteurized, you buy bottled raw milk. I mean, that's not even legal to transport from state to state. You're not allowed to transport that because it's not safe.
So they're smuggling like milk.
Yeah, basically. I mean, a lot of them, I think you can buy it within your state from some probably one-off farmers market, but you can't, it's not eligible for sale kind of through interstate commerce. So,
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
interesting.
yeah.
Well, that's really cool, and I think we obviously covered like the nutritional piece, health,
Mm-hmm.
obviously like the sourcing and sort of like the kind of like the ethical part of it. The last one is just obviously would be the environmental, which I think it's important to also kind of cover. And I learned a few different things as far as the environmental practices that some dairy farmers are actually using in a really good positive way. What's your kind of like take on this? And as far as like the water usage of obviously of dairy farmers or like dairy farms and stuff like that, and how actually kind of is handled, and is it better or worse for the environment, like the dairy industry, basically, from what you know?
Yeah. So from what I know, the dairy industry as a whole in the United States accounts for 2% of greenhouse gas emissions. That's very low. I mean, considering how many people it feeds across the US, and to account for only 2% of greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, to me, that is, if it's not the nutrition that gets you, to me, it's the environmental stewardship. And they also are making a lot of advancements. I mean, they used to have way more cows and they produced way less milk. And now they have way fewer cows and they produce way more milk. And a lot of that comes from good genetics, better cow care, better feed, and a better understanding kind of for what works for those animals, what's comfortable for them, what do they prefer to eat,
Yep.
how to feed them through different stages of their life. So I think people are like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. I can't believe they're producing that much. But it really comes from just making the most of them and learning how to optimize kind of what they're capable of as a cow.
Yeah.
As far as the water goes, I mean, I grew up in a drought-ridden state. I mean, I'm not sure if you've seen it, but unfortunately, the whole state of California is on fire, basically. And a lot of that comes from, there's a lot of factors that play into it, but it's so dry there. We've not had a good rain in California, and we've been in a drought for a very long time. So water usage is a huge deal, especially, I mean, for all dairy farmers, but especially for the ones that are kind of in these drought-ridden states. And on average, a gallon of water is used 5 times on a dairy. They're excellent recyclers. They just
Which
really
is
are, yeah.
which is crazy to think too, that when you start to compare this, because I just read this like recently on some data, the amount of water used by, for example, growing almonds,
Mm-hmm.
which are like it's basically what produces the almond milk. I have like one of the data, the most interesting things, and before I even say this, I want to make sure that I kind of like add it to the show notes as far as like the sourcing. But from what I think I remember from what I read,
Mm-hmm.
there are towns in California that actually have water shortages because a lot of the water that is being like used is actually utilized in agriculture, specifically to almond production,
Mm-hmm.
which to me was like, holy crap, like
Yeah.
that's crazy,
Yeah.
right? And then one of the things that I also noticed, for example, here in Florida, from the dairy farmers that I went to, essentially what they say is like, oh yeah, we actually, a lot of the water that we use comes recycled from the water from actually the rainfall. So whenever there's rainy season here in Florida, which it's right now, they essentially collect this in like ponds and stuff like that, and they use and
Mm-hmm.
recycle some of that water for a lot of the different things that they use in their farm. So
Yeah.
again, like
Super cool.
yeah, and it's, people don't know this, like they just think like we're just kind of like using water left and right without, they don't understand the sourcing of it either.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
exactly. And I think, the water is one aspect. Farmers are great at making the most of natural resources. They really do respect the environment. I think another thing, I don't know if they touched on this when you were on the farm, but a lot of farmers will take, depending on the season. So for example, like pumpkin season, when there's leftover pumpkins, a lot of times that will be fed to cows. It reduces food waste. First off, it adds to their diet. I just think it's a really cool
yep.
way to use food and make the most of the food that we produce, because in the United States, we waste so much food. I mean, it's like 40% of the food we produce gets thrown away. Most of that does happen on the consumer side. But as far as the farming side, like you have way too many pumpkins, so you can feed it to cows and they're able to eat it and then upcycle it into something that we can drink and that we can, be nourished from.
Yeah.
I just think that's really cool. And then another aspect of it too, I'm not sure, you may have heard of this too, but they're starting a lot of environmental effort. So methane digesters are going to be a huge deal coming up. And basically it's capturing the methane that comes off of the manure and using it as fuel. And so so they're like redirecting it. A lot of these dairies are going to be 100% fueled off of poop, realistically, off of all the manure on their dairy. That's going to be their energy source. And they're so great at innovation and coming up with ways to minimize their footprint and maximize their use of natural resources.
And then people don't understand the impact that cows have on like the life cycle of like of all of us, of all life, and I think it's what you're saying, like, a lot of like the manure that comes out of it, it's kind of like also fueling the soil, and because of the soil there's like CO2 being injected into it to improve obviously a lot of the different things into like the actual soil so we can actually have an actual place where we can grow things and things like that. And again, like people just don't look at the bigger picture. They just kind of look at the specific things, and they interpret information based on documentaries that push an agenda to kind of show something that, and at the end of the day, that's just made basically to get more views and more clicks essentially, which at the end of the day, it's like the main thing. So awesome. Well, I think we cover a pretty good amount, and we're kind of coming close to the very end of our conversation. Is there anything else that you typically like to share? Anything that we have not covered yet that you feel would be important for people to know as far as what you teach, what you do, and what you kind of like the message that you try to convey to all people and consumers?
Yeah, I mean, I would say my biggest goal, I think a lot of people misinterpret my page. They misinterpret my goal. My goal is to help you with some food fears. There's so many Netflix documentaries. There's so many Hollywood actors that have their opinions, and they're obviously on a big platform for people to see. My biggest thing is to try to myth bust and make people feel confident with their food, whether that be dairy products, whether that be organic versus conventional, however you want to look at it. I really try to just make people feel confident. And at the end of the day, the choice that's best for you is the one that you feel comfortable with. So I have a lot of people come to me and they say, well, Lauren, I saw this on a Netflix documentary, so now I'm completely dairy free, but I love milk. And then they'll tell me kind of what their issue is. My goal is to help people like that. It's not to force everybody to drink milk. I don't think milk is for everyone. But I do think you should be able to make your decision based off of fact. And those facts are not going to come from a Netflix documentary. There are so many dairy farmers now online. I mean, people can ask me about the dairy and nutrition side of things, but there are so many dairy farmers on Instagram, on Facebook that are ready and able to answer questions to just kind of broaden your view. So I think the biggest thing that I like to encourage people is be very picky on where you get your information from. Because a lot of times it may not reflect the industry as a whole. It may not tell the whole story. It likely tells just one side. So that's just a little something I like to add in.
And I think it's kind of fighting the fear mongering and making sure that we fight kind of the myths with facts and making sure that we kind of convey the message as dietitians and nutrition experts to ensure people like make decisions that are informed, not based on fallacies or just kind of misinformation, which I think is a big problem now that we're kind of facing. So cool. Well, the last few things that we have in our podcast is just some rapid fire questions, just to kind of like end it on a good note. Just simple things. So it'll be the first thing that kind of comes to your mind, and we'll go from there. You ready?
Yeah.
Awesome.
See how I do.
First one would be, what is your favorite exercise, movement, or anything that you like to do to stay active?
Running.
Okay, good. Yep. Are you actually like a runner, like marathon runner, or do you just like
run for fun? Oh, no. So my approach is quick and effective. I don't want to run very far. I'd rather run fast for a short amount of time. So I mean, max 5 miles. Yeah.
Okay.
Max 5. Good.
Yeah. Second question would be, what is a book that you would just give to anybody to really have on their bookshelf at any given time? It could be a book or something that you feel like you read, nutrition, non-nutrition, whatever may be the case.
Oh, goodness gracious. I really love the book Redeeming Love. I can't remember the author, but hopefully people know what I'm talking about.
We'll look it up and we'll put it
Yeah.
under the show notes. We always like to kind of get different kinds of perspectives. So,
Yeah.
redeeming love. The third question would be if you could recommend either a podcast or an educational resource online that you believe in, what would be the place or what would be the podcast or YouTube channel or like Instagram account that you feel like everybody should follow? And you can definitely shameless plug yourself on there.
Well, I hope people follow me. Okay. I love the Food Science Babe. I think she does an excellent job.
I want to bring her to the podcast so bad.
She's amazing. I did a live with her and she's just awesome. I think she really blazes a trail on her own and she is not afraid to correct misinformation and speak up. And so I think everyone should follow her. I think that would take a lot of food burden off of people's shoulders.
That's good. Yeah,
and myself.
Definitely. I'm gonna reach out to her to see if she'll bring on and come on the podcast because I think she'd be a great person to have. Great.
She's great.
Last one would be if you were. This is the funnest one. If you were stranded on a desert island for the rest of your life and you can choose one food and one food only to live off of, what would that be? Milk. I'm just kidding. I don't know what you choose.
I was gonna say ice cream. So kind of a plug. I don't know. I'm kind of between. That is a hard question. I'm like, do I want breakfast, lunch, dinner?
That
kind of
because there's an analytical brain actually kind of kicking in. So if it was like the first thing, like 3, 2, 1, go, what would you say?
Pizza.
There you go. That's mine. You hit me. Yeah,
cool.
that's yeah. And I've heard all kinds of crazy different things on this podcast, from like mangoes to like poke bowls to like lasagna to like all kinds of crazy stuff.
Poke bowls. I think I can do a poke bowl every once in a while.
Yeah.
For the rest of your life.
To the one their own. Like some people are just interesting when it comes down to their food choices, but I respect them. So anyways, how can people find you, Lauren? How can people reach out to you, get in touch with you, connect with you, and just learn from you?
Yeah. So unfortunately I don't have my website yet. It is coming soon. So most people just find me on Instagram at the Dairy Dietitian. I try to be really good with my messages. So if you've got messages or questions, I will do my best to answer them. I'm also on Facebook. I have a Facebook page and I recently am on Pinterest. So you can find some of my recipes dairy friendly on Pinterest. So
love it. Well,
mainly Instagram.
We're definitely going to make sure we link up all your channels on our show notes. So people can definitely reach out to you and get more connected with you and everything that all the content that you put out. So awesome. Well, thank you, Lauren, for taking your time today and being here on the podcast. I'm looking forward to get the feedback from this one in the future. And of course, if you need anything from me, just let me know.
Great. Thanks so much.